Rose and Cashin's emotional journey in Dry Creek is a tale of heartbreak, second chances, and love that rises above every rumor. From public rejection to unexpected shelter, from painful pasts to a bond built on healing and trust, this story shows how true love sees the heart, not the scars. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And tell me, where are you watching from? Let's get started. Rose McKenna stepped off the dusty stagecoach with her gloved hands, clutching the handle of her small, battered suitcase, her heart pounding with hope and fear in equal measure. Dry Creek wasn't much to look at, just a scattering of wooden buildings, a church steeple, and a wide-open land that stretched toward the horizon under a pale morning sky. But to her, it had glimmered like a fresh start. She had spent so many nights dreaming of a place far away from the smoke-filled saloon in St. Louis, far from the piano tunes and drunken laughter, far from the ache of watching her little brother fade away despite all her efforts. Coming here as a mail-order bride had been her last chance at belonging, at respectability, at building a life where no one whispered behind her back. She stepped onto the boardwalk, smoothing her worn but carefully mended dress, and looked around for the man whose letters had seemed so kind, so full of promises. Amos Cartwright, a farmer with strong handwriting and gentle words, a man who had written that he wanted a wife with a steady heart and a willingness to build a home together. Rose had believed him. She wanted so desperately to believe. When she finally spotted him, tall, broad-shouldered, with a trimmed beard and clean clothes, relief flooded her. She lifted a hand in a small greeting, offering a hopeful smile. But the expression he gave her in return wasn't warm. It wasn't even polite. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and he looked her up and down like she was something stuck to his boot. "Rose McKenna," he said, loud enough for the handful of townspeople nearby to hear. "Yes," she answered softly. "Mr. Cartwright, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." But he didn't return her smile. Instead, he thrust a crumpled telegram toward her. "This true?" She unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was from someone in St. Louis, a name she recognized, a man who had known her at the saloon, someone who clearly couldn't keep his bitterness to himself. The message was short, brutal, revealing everything. Amos hadn't known that she had sung in a saloon called the Red Lantern, that men had called her Ruby Red, that she had served drinks late into the night. "I didn't lie to you," Rose whispered, her cheeks burning. "I told you I worked." "You didn't tell me what kind of work," Amos cut in sharply. Then turning toward the townsfolk who had begun to watch, he raised his voice even more. "I will not be marrying a saloon girl. I won't bring shame into my home." The words hit her harder than any shove. Rose felt as though the ground beneath her had split open. She tried to speak, to explain how she had only worked there to buy medicine for her dying brother, how she had kept her dignity no matter what people assumed, but the humiliation choking her throat made it impossible. Amos stepped back from her as though she carried some kind of stain, shaking his head slowly, his eyes cold. "I won't take you," he said. "Find yourself another fool." He turned away. Laughter snickered somewhere behind her. Someone whispered her old name, Ruby Red, and that single whisper carried enough judgment to crush the fragile hope she had carried all the way across the country. Her suitcase suddenly felt unbearably heavy, and though the sun was warm, she shivered. She had nowhere to go, no money to return, and no idea what would become of her. Everything she had dreamed of had shattered before she could even place her feet firmly in this new town. As she stood frozen in despair, a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see a tall man with dark hair, dressed in a simple but well-tailored coat. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held something she hadn't seen since her brother's last days. Kindness, gentle and quiet. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep, steady. Rose blinked rapidly, swallowing back the sting of tears. "I'm fine, I'll manage." But her voice trembled so much that even she didn't believe her own words. The man didn't press her. He simply looked around at the gawking townsfolk, his gaze turning to steel until each one of them looked away. Then he glanced down at her suitcase. "My name's Cashen Ridge." He spoke as though he were offering nothing more than a practical solution. "I run a ranch a few miles south of here. I've got a spare room. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. No obligations, no expectations." Rose blinked, startled by the unexpected generosity. A stranger offering help without asking anything in return felt impossible. "I can't impose," she whispered. "You're not." His tone was calm, matter-of-fact. "You're a person who needs shelter, that's all." Rose hesitated. She didn't know him, but she also knew she had nowhere else to go. And something in his expression, something steady and unhurried and strangely familiar, made her believe he meant his words sincerely. After a long moment, she nodded. "All right, thank you." He nodded once, gave her suitcase a gentle lift, and led the way to his wagon. The short ride to his ranch passed mostly in silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. Rose stared out at the rolling fields dusted with early spring grass, the wide sky stretching open above them. It was the kind of land that felt quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the noisy, smoke-filled saloon where she had spent her last years. When they reached the ranch, she was surprised by its size. A neat white house stood in the center of the property, surrounded by sturdy fences and rows of trees. It was the home of someone who worked hard, but took care of what he owned. Cashen helped her down from the wagon and carried her things inside without a word. He showed her to a tidy room with a window overlooking the fields. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. "Work if you want, rest if you need to. You're safe." Safe. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had said that to her, much less meant it. In the days that followed, they lived in a polite, quiet rhythm. Cashen treated her with respect, never asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. He spent mornings out on the land, tending to cattle, fixing fences, and checking water lines. Rose kept to the house, cleaning or cooking small meals to feel useful, though he never expected her to. Sometimes at dusk they sat on the porch together, watching the sun sink behind the hills. He rarely spoke of himself, but once, when the light was fading and the air grew still, he mentioned his wife and child, lost years ago to illness. The grief in his voice was soft but deep, like a river that had carved out the shape of him over time. And Rose, with tears she tried to hide, told him about her little brother, how she had sung him to sleep when he was scared, how she had worked every night, hoping for a miracle that never came. Those shared threads of loss connected them before either one realized it. They still kept a respectful distance, each nursing old wounds quietly, but something gentle had begun to grow between them. A trust, an understanding, a sense that perhaps two broken hearts could find comfort in the same quiet space. For the first time in years, Rose felt herself slowly, tentatively breathing again, not as Ruby Red, not as a burden or a shameful secret, but as herself. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, the ranch felt less empty with the two of them there. The house seemed warmer, the evenings felt less lonely. In the quiet of that growing companionship, something new began to take root, something fragile but full of promise. Rose had finally begun to feel like Dry Creek might hold a place for her. The weeks on Cashen's ranch passed gently, each day smoothing out the sharp edges inside her. She woke to fresh air instead of stale smoke, to birdsong instead of drunken laughter. Cashen's steady presence, quiet, strong, considerate, had become an anchor she didn't know she needed. He never pushed her to talk, never judged her silences, and never hinted that her past made her less deserving of safety or kindness. For the first time in years, Rose felt herself unfolding slowly, like a flower warmed by spring sunlight. She hummed sometimes while doing chores, soft little tunes she hadn't dared sing since her brother died. She helped mend shirts, cooked simple meals, and found comfort in the small routines of ranch life. When Cashen returned from long days working the land, she met him at the door with a tired smile that always made his gaze soften. Neither spoke openly of the connection deepening between them. But it was there in every shared glance, every quiet evening on the porch, every gentle moment when their hands brushed by accident and both pretended not to notice. Then one afternoon everything shattered. Cashin had gone into town for supplies, and Rose followed a few hours later to pick up thread she needed. She walked down the dusty main street with her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, feeling almost comfortable among the townspeople who had begun nodding politely in her direction instead of staring. But as she neared the general store, a loud, mocking voice sliced through the air. "Well, I'll be damned if it ain't Ruby Red herself." The name froze her in place. She turned to see a man leaning against a post, a smirk twisting his face. She recognized him instantly. Cal Watley, one of the saloon regulars from St. Louis. His presence felt like a fist closing around her throat. "Folks here know you used to sing for drunkards," he called out, delighting in every word, "or that men tossed coins at you to keep 'em smiling." A few people paused, whispers sparking like wildfire. Someone else murmured her old nickname, and the air grew thick with judgment. Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks, then spread like fire across her skin. Cal wasn't finished. Guess the rumors were true. This fancy rancher sure took in more than he bargained for. His laughter rolled across the street. Rose stood rigid, humiliation flooding her. She wanted to shout that nothing he said was true, that she had never sold more than her voice and her time, that she had done everything for her dying brother. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Rumors had a way of drowning out truth. When she finally made it back to the ranch, she could barely breathe. She shut her bedroom door, pressed a trembling hand to her lips, and let herself cry for the first time since arriving in Dry Creek. She cried for the peace she had just begun to find, for the man who had offered her shelter without knowing how deeply broken she was, for the fear that she was dragging him into shame he did not deserve. By the time night fell, she had made her decision. She packed quietly, each folded dress feeling like another piece of her heart being set aside. She left a small note on the kitchen table. Only a few words, because she didn't trust herself to write more. "Thank you for everything. Please don't look for me." Then she walked out into the biting wind, her footsteps swallowed by the rising storm. Cashin returned home late, snow dusting his coat. The moment he stepped inside, he felt something wrong. The house was too still, too cold, as though the warmth Rose had brought into it had vanished. When he found her note, his hands tightened around the fragile paper until it nearly tore. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stop to eat or warm himself. He grabbed his coat again, mounted his horse despite the storm strengthening by the minute, and rode hard toward the train station. Snow lashed against his face, the wind cutting into him, but he pushed forward with fierce determination. Rose was not leaving him, not like this, not because of lies and cruel gossip. By the time he reached the station, the world was nearly white, wind howling through the empty platforms. But through the swirling snow, he saw a small figure sitting alone on a bench, clutching her suitcase, her shoulders shaking with silent tears. "Rose!" His voice tore through the storm. She looked up, startled, then stood quickly, wiping her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice breaking. "It's too dangerous." "I don't give a damn about danger," he answered, stepping toward her. Snow clung to his eyelashes, his coat soaked through, but he barely noticed. "You left because of those fools in town, didn't you?" She looked away. "I heard them, and the things they said, they're true enough to hurt. I won't let you be ruined because of me." Cashin took her suitcase from her trembling hands and set it on the ground. Then he dropped to one knee in the snow, the storm whirling around them. Rose gasped, staring down at him, her breath visible in the icy air. "You listen to me," he said, his voice steady despite the wind. "Your past doesn't stain you, it doesn't scare me, and it damn sure doesn't define who you are now." Tears filled her eyes again. "You don't know everything. I know enough to love you." The words came from deep inside him, honest and unguarded. "I love your strength, your kindness, the way you fight to survive. I love the peace you've brought into my home, into my life." Rose pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. He reached out, taking her cold fingers in his. "Marry me, not because you owe me anything, not because the town needs convincing, but because I can't imagine a life without you in it." For a moment, the storm seemed to quiet around them, as if even the wind was waiting. Rose sank to her knees in front of him, tears streaming freely now. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against the cold. They married quietly a week later, a simple ceremony in the small church, with only the pastor and his wife as witnesses. The townspeople whispered, of course, whispered that Cashen Ridge had lost his mind, that he deserved better, that she was trouble-dressed in a pretty smile. But those whispers slowly began to fade, because Cashen didn't falter. He walked proudly beside his wife, introduced her with warmth, and treated her with a tenderness that softened even the harshest opinions. People saw how he smiled now, how his shoulders no longer carried the same weight of grief, how the lonely rancher had found peace again. And they saw Rose, gentle, hard-working, respectful, slowly becoming part of the community, always kind even to those who had once judged her. Months passed, then years. Their ranch grew warmer with laughter, shared meals, and evenings spent, watching the sunset together. They faced challenges, failed crops, harsh winters, the occasional judgment that resurfaced, but they faced them side by side. Their love wasn't a whirlwind or a fairy tale. It was steady, built from healing and tenderness, and a determination to choose each other every single day. And in Dry Creek, people eventually stopped using her old name altogether. To them, she became Rose Ridge, the woman who had survived whispers and storms, who had built a life of dignity and devotion with the man who saw her heart before her past. Together, Cashen and Rose became a quiet legend in the town, a reminder whispered to new couples and children growing up that a person's worth isn't etched by their past, but by their courage to rise above it. That real love, once found, carries a strength deeper than rumor and brighter than shame. On their small ranch, with the wide sky stretching above them and the steady comfort of each other's arms, Rose and Cashen lived a life shaped not by where they came from, but by the love they chose, every morning, every night, for the rest of their days.